Hello everyone and welcome to an introductory course on Java graphics. Now if you've watched our prior videos on Java basics, you'll have noticed that all of our output has been printed to the output window. We're not going to do that for graphics because the output window can only handle text. For graphics, we're going to actually pop open a separate window, which is called a frame in Java, and we're going to draw everything on there. Now, the start of the program, we're still going to have our main method, but it's going to actually do something a little different than what we're used to. The stuff that we are used to is we're going to just initialize all our variables and instantiate all our objects. We're also going to create the frame or the pop-up window that we would see. In addition to that, we're going to create a process or something called a thread that's going to run 60 times every second. And that thread is going to handle all of the in-game processing and moving all of the objects. In other words, if I press the right arrow, the player moves to the right. If I press the up arrow, the player moves to the left. If I press the space bar, maybe the player will fire a projectile at a monster. And the monsters, by the way, are all moving at the same time. So that's what's going to be happening. And as I said, this happens 60 times a second. So this processing is going to be happening over and over again. Let's start with the basics and head over to Netbeans to see what it looks like. If you want to learn Java programming, or just programming in general, subscribe to this channel. We put out a lot of videos that range from beginner topics to more advanced programming concepts. Also, please like this video, share it with a friend, and write a comment as well. It goes a long way to help promote a channel like this. Now, let's get back to the video. So here we are in Netbeans, and this is our program. As you can see, I have a lot of things underlined in red. That's because I don't have my import statements. And here they are. Now, luckily, you don't have to really remember what these are because when you have something underlined in red, you can click on it and it'll automatically ask you to import the proper statement. But regardless, let's take a look at what this code does. We have our class, Java Graphics Tutorial, and we're extending JComponent and implementing these two things which are called interfaces. Now, if you're not familiar with these, you can watch another video on what object-oriented programming and implementation is. But for now, all you have to do is know that every single thing that's in here, here, and here, we're going to get access to in our class. And you'll see that as an example in a little while. Next thing we do is we declare two variables that'll hold the width and the height of our frame or pop-up window. And here you can see we're initializing them to 1,000 wide by 500 tall. You could use any numbers you want. I just chose 1,000 and 500. Now we're going to set up our graphical user interface. First thing we do, create a new frame or pop-up window. We call this method to make sure that the window can close. Here's our comment. This method will give us a title. So that's the title up here. This method will set the dimensions of our frame. Now you can see I've added a little bit of buffer space. That's just so we have a little wiggle room at the edges of our boundary. Now we don't want our frame or window to be resizable by the person using our program. So I pass in a value of false. Of course, you can change this if you want someone to resize your window. This takes everything that we're doing right now and adds it to something called a content pane. Content pane is something that's going to allow us to draw graphics on our window or draw text or anything we want. Now in here, we can add other things. For example, we can add buttons to our game. Start, stop, inventory, whatever your game is about. You add them here, and then when you're done adding all of them, we're not going to use any, we call this method pack. This packs everything together that we've added on our screen. We call this method so the window that we're about to open opens in the middle of our computer right here, as opposed to opening up way in the upper left or somewhere else. Of course, we want to set it to true, but we have the option of having an invisible one, so we can kind of play around with that if that's something that you want to do in your program. And last but not least, we add something called a key listener and a mouse listener. This is code that allows Java to listen for keyboard input. In other words, if the player hits the space bar, something should happen. If the player hits the G key, something should happen. If the player clicks the left mouse button or moves the mouse, something should happen. That's the end of our constructor. We set up our frame and open it up. Now let's scroll down to here. I'm going to skip these two methods for now. We'll get back to them later. These are methods when we extend JComponent And when we implement key listener and mouse listener, there are certain things that are declared in here that force anyone using them to create methods like this. We have to have one of each of these methods or our program will not compile. So we need a key pressed method, a key type method. They have to be written exactly like this. And in future videos, we're actually going to use some of these methods, specifically key pressed and key released. Now let's jump down to our main. In our main method, this is what gets called when we run our program. First thing we do is we take this entire class and instantiate it, and then we call a method on our class called start. Well, we wrote that method right here. This method is going to create something called a thread. A thread is a chunk of code that runs independently of everything else. It can actually run simultaneously. So this method, this thread, will run over and over and over again. Why over and over again? Well, it's actually going to run only once, but we have this while loop in here. This while loop says while true, which means it's going to run again and again and again. It's never going to stop. What's going to happen inside this while loop? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to call a method that we decided is called loop. You can call it whatever you like. That's up above. We'll look at that in a minute. And after we call loop, before we call it again, we're going to take a nap. We're going to sleep. How long are we going to sleep for? 1,000 milliseconds divided by 60 is how long we will wait. Then we will run it again. We will wait, run it again. We will wait, run it again. And it will go over and over again, each time calling loop and each time waiting 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second divided by 60 or 1/60th of a second. And finally, after we create this thread, we start the thread, which means we run it. And this goes over and over and over again. Now, let's take a look at what happens inside this loop method, because this is the thing that's going to be running 60 times every second. Let's scroll up, and here's the loop method. The only thing it does is call the method repaint. Now, we didn't write this method. This method is coming along automatically when we extend JComponent. That's part of inheritance. What does this repaint method do? It forces Java to redraw the entire window that you popped up above. And how does it do that? Well, it calls this method, paint component. This method, as you can see, is blank, but we will put in here all of our code that will draw things on the screen. We can draw circles, we can draw rectangles, we can draw images, we can do whatever we want. So once again, this method is called 60 times a second. It will force a redrawing of our screen 60 times a second, which causes this to run 60 times a second. Now I think it's time to test our program. As you can see, we have our frame opened in the middle. Of course, it's blank. We haven't drawn anything on there. And you can see down here, it says Java Graphics is running. And in order to end this program, you click this X button. Or you can click this X button. Usually you click this one. This closes the window and ends the program. As you can see, that's now gone. Now this will become a lot more clear when we do an example. That's the topic of the next video. We're going to draw rectangles, we're going to draw circles, and we'll even put some text on the screen. I hope you learned something from watching this video. Please remember to subscribe and share this video with others who are learning Java programming. Thanks for watching, and take care, everyone.